Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, helping you prepare for the PMP exam. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Hello and welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, where you can watch and hear the PMP exam. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. In this lesson, we continue our journey through project time management with a look at the estimate activity durations process. Your first impression may be that estimating durations, well, that's going to be a bit cold and a mathematical process, but actually it's not so. Estimating activity durations gives you a chance to involve your project team and experts, to get their input from them and to think carefully about the work ahead. So there is in fact a very human element and group dynamic that is involved. There is an art as well as a science to estimation. In estimating activity durations, logic and math meet instinct and gut feeling. Years of experience and knowledge of experts are invaluable for this process. So in this lesson we're going to go through what it means to estimate activity durations and discuss how progressive elaboration applies to duration estimates. We explain the differences between effort and duration, and we also distinguish elapsed time. We consider the many inputs that are required to create activity duration estimates. There is a mixed bag of tools and techniques that are similar to what is used in other knowledge areas and processes. We have expert judgment and group decision-making techniques, but also have more mathematical approaches, such as 3 different methods for estimation, and will also cover reserve analysis. And finally, we discuss how this process works in conjunction with other project time management processes. Well, we have a lot to cover, and because there is such a lot to cover, that means we had to cut this lesson up into 2 parts. Here in part 1, you'll hear the general overview and all about the inputs, and then in part 2, we'll look at the tools, techniques, output, and you'll get a review. But of course, as you know already, we always begin at the very top with a quick review of the knowledge area and the processes, working our way towards the focus of this lesson here. So, project time management, according to the PMBOK guide, is simply that knowledge area which includes the processes required to manage the timely completion of the project. And this is accomplished by defining activities which are then sequenced. They're given an approximate duration, they have assigned resources, and of course then a sequenced list of activities of a given time and resources is created, which we call a schedule that is modified and executed over the project life cycle. And now on to the processes which are part of project time management. There are 7 of them, and because this is such a long lesson already, let's do just the briefest of review. It all begins with the process of plan schedule management, the process of establishing the policies, procedures, and documentation for planning, developing, managing, executing, and controlling the project schedule. From there, we move on to define activities, the process of identifying and documenting the specific actions to be performed to produce the project deliverables. Next is sequence activities. That's the process of identifying and documenting relationships among the project activities. Once we have all of that, we're getting into estimating. We will first estimate activity resources. That's the process of estimating the type and quantities of material, human resources, equipment, or supplies required to perform each activity. Now we're moving on to estimate activity durations. How long is it going to take is what this process is all about. It's the process of estimating the number of work hours, work periods needed to complete individual activities with estimated resources. Now that we have all of that, we can finally develop our schedule in the process of analyzing activity sequences, durations, resource requirements, and schedule constraints to create the project schedule model. And of course, time is important. We have to keep a lid on it. We have to keep it under control. We need the process of control schedule. That's the process of monitoring the status of project activities to update project progress and manage changes to the schedule baseline to achieve the plan. And here are these 7 processes again, but this time with the focus of into which process group do they fall. As you may recall, project time management is mostly about planning there, with one process control schedule being in the monitoring and controlling process group, which means that the process which is the focus of this lesson here, estimate activity durations, falls into the planning process group as well. The main concept that you have to understand in the estimate activity durations process is that the experts should provide estimates for activity durations. So it's not up to you as the project manager to estimate how long project tasks will take on your own. So if you need to know how long a design takes to make, ask the designers for their estimates. Ask the computer programmer how long it would take to write the code to specifications, or ask the foreman how long it takes to build a particular portion of the project. And of course, ask yourself as the project management specialist, so to speak, how long the project management administrative activities will take. So don't estimate everything yourself. If you ask the specialists, you'll be more confident in your activity duration estimates, and you'll also get their buy-in. We first described the concept of progressive elaboration in the lesson on developing the project management plan. It basically means that you begin at a high level and you learn more about the project as it goes on, and you add more and more detail. Progressive elaboration does not only apply to the project management plan, but also to activity estimates as well, and later on you will see in future lessons on estimating cost. The same applies for cost estimates. Estimates evolve and change over time. Initially, the designer may tell you that the design will take 80 hours, but later on, when the scope is better defined and we all understand more about the project, the designer may let you know that she needs 120 hours. That's not bad estimating on her part. That is simply progressive elaboration. More details came to light. As a process, estimate activity durations is iterative. The more you learn about the project, duration estimates become more accurate and of better quality. And this is a good moment when we want to talk about effort and duration and compare them. So effort. The PMBOK guide defines effort as the number of labor units required to complete a schedule activity or work breakdown structure component, often expressed in hours, days, or weeks. What does this mean? Well, effort focuses on the amount of labor applied to the activity, but it does not include activities outside of the hands-on work, such as time for meetings or work interruptions. This is where duration comes in. Duration accounts for project management activities, meetings, as well as work interruptions. Whereas the PMBOK guide defines effort as duration, the total number of work periods, not including holidays or other non-working periods required to complete a schedule activity or work breakdown structure component, usually expressed as work days or work weeks. Duration is sometimes incorrectly equated also with elapsed time. But as you can see, duration accounts for the indirect activities but does not account for holidays or non-working periods. So let's clarify all the terms that we have heard so far on the following slide by looking at effort, duration, and elapsed time. So once again, everything begins with the effort. The effort answers the question, how many labor units are required to complete an activity? So in regards to the effort, we're talking about considering expert judgment, task complexity, skill level, as well as experience of the person who's working on a specific task. Then at the next level we have duration. This is the total number of work periods. That is not including your holidays or the non-working periods. This considers not only the hands-on work or effort, but also the related indirect work. This includes the resource availability and resource capabilities. So if we have an effort of X, but we have somebody who is a bit slower, the resource capability, then we end up with a duration that is longer than the estimated effort. And on top of that, we have the elapsed time. Under elapsed time, we include waiting periods, and because these people sometimes have to go on holidays or go on vacation and have other interruptions. So this is how effort, duration, and also elapsed time are related to each other. In our earlier example, our designer told us that it would take her 80 hours to complete a particular task, but you should further probe your designer and ask, well, by 80 hours, do you mean that this is going to be 2 weeks of non-stop working effort, or is it going to be 2 weeks of working effort over a period of 4 weeks of elapsed time? Because 2 weeks of non-stop work means that the designer starts on Monday of week 1 and would then work exactly 10 working days and would be finished, well, exactly 10 working days later. She would work 2 weeks. 2 weeks would have passed, so elapsed time is also 2 weeks. And by asking all of these questions, you learn, well, the designer works on your project as well as on other projects. This means that on Monday, she's going to work on your project, but then on Tuesday, she has to go to a client meeting for the other project she's working on. And oh, by the way, next week she's out of the office for 3 days on vacation. And finally, after 4 weeks, she will be done with the task that is assigned to her by you. This is another way of looking at the difference between effort, duration, and elapsed time. In both cases, the effort was 80 hours or 10 resource days of actual work. In the first example, the designer was able to work continuously, and so the effort of 10 days also had a duration and elapsed time of 10 days. In our second example, the effort of 10 days was interrupted by various waiting periods, other projects, and availability of the resource, which is why we ended up with an elapsed time of 20 days. We learn from this that we have to make it clear to our specialists that we want them to tell us the effort when estimating the task duration. Have you heard the expression, too many cooks in the kitchen? Well, keep in mind that the more people are on an activity, the more time is going to be required to coordinate, communicate, and there will also be more distractions. Keep in mind too that there are only so many hours of working at a task before there are diminishing returns. So you reach a point when employees are overworked or fatigued, they become less productive. Adding more overtime, for example, may not be the optimal solution. Once you have your effort, you can input this into your project management software, which hopefully has a resource calendar and a holiday calendar. So when you go and you put those 10 days into your software and the 10 days start on December 20th, it realizes, well, nobody works on Christmas Day and nobody works on New Year's Eve, so there are going to have to be additional days off. This is part of what makes duration estimation so much fun. Let's take a brief look here at the ITTO overview from the PMBOK guide, our inputs, tools, techniques, and outputs for the estimate activity duration process. And one thing that's immediately obvious is the incredible number there of 10 inputs as well as 6 tools and techniques that are used in the process. The main output is the activity duration estimates, as you might expect from a process that is called estimate activity durations. But also important are any project document updates, which are then required as a result of going through this process. Let's take a look at the details. Alright, so there are 10 inputs, and as you can imagine, we won't be able to squeeze all of them here onto one slide. So we got a 2-slide quick overview here. It all begins with the schedule management plan as an input. Of course, if you want to estimate the duration of an activity, you need to know which activities you have. That's why we have the activity list as well as the activity attributes, as well as the activity resource requirements. Remember, our designer went on a holiday, went on a vacation. Well, you need the resource calendars in order to figure out who's here and who's not here. The next 5 inputs here are the project scope statement. We need the risk register, the resource breakdown structure, the RBS. We need some enterprise environmental factors, and we also have organizational process assets as inputs. So much for this quick overview. Now let's jump into the details of a few select of these 10. And let's just begin with the first one, with the schedule management plan. We already know that by definition, according to the PMBOK guide, the schedule management plan is a component of the project management plan that establishes the criteria and the activities for developing, monitoring, and controlling the schedule. So, the schedule management plan is used as an input for many processes, but it is especially important for estimating activity durations because estimation methods used, the level of accuracy, units of measure, project update cycles, and other criteria are documented in the schedule management plan, and we need to know this in order to properly estimate durations. The activity list and activity attributes are originally developed in the define activities process and used as inputs to many of the processes here in project time management. So, in this process here, we need the activity list because this is the complete list of all activities necessary to create the project deliverables. Resources will be needed for these activities. We have to estimate the duration for every single activity, and by using this list as an input, well, we won't forget a single activity. Then we have the activity attributes. These are the attributes such as the predecessors, successors, constraints, or assumptions for each of our activities. These are the characteristics of your activities which provide information so you can estimate resources required for each activity and duration required for each activity. For example, we need to understand the skill level of a resource and the nature of the activity so that we can estimate how long they will take to finish an activity. And along the very same lines of thinking, we need the activity resource requirements. They are an output from the estimate activity resources process. In this document, we defined which types of resources will be working on each task, and this is very important. For instance, let's assume that we estimated a particular installation needs 2 electricians. If we find that we only have 1 electrician available, then our duration estimates will have to take this into consideration. And this normally doesn't mean that you can just go at it mathematically and say, well, if 2 electricians take 9 days to install a generator, then how long will 1 electrician take? The answer is more than double the time, because these 2 specialists, they need to work as a team and help each other. If only 1 is available, then he may not be able to even install the generator because he needs a partner to work with him. Next, we have the resource calendars, which are also used in the areas of project human resource management and project procurement management. According to the PMBOK guide, this is a calendar that identifies the working days and shifts on which each specific resource is available. This should include detail on when and for how long the resource is available. So, for example, a resource may be available for the duration of a project or assigned to just a particular activity. Resources that need to be listed on a calendar are not limited to labor or people. Other common resources to include in most projects are equipment, work locations like conference rooms or work areas, and materials. The resource calendar has influence on duration due to specific attributes that it contains, because for most projects you need somebody to be available and not just anybody to perform an activity, where attributes need to be factored in. When listing a resource, a specific skill or skill level may be required. You may also need to consider their location and if they have any travel restrictions. For equipment, like a truck, you need to know if the truck is available, but also know its load capacity, speed, operator requirements. In other words, do you need a special license to operate it? Other features may be relevant to your requirements, such as if it is refrigerated or if it has a lift to load and unload the materials. So, for example, our resource calendar will tell us that our 5-ton truck is not available during the time when we need to haul around Earth, but the 2.5-ton truck is. This means that we'll have to use the smaller truck and make appropriate adjustments in our duration estimation. When you look at our next input, the project scope statement, you may be wondering, well, why do we need this here? Because the focus in this process is not on the scope and it's not on the requirements. Instead, we're focusing on the activities and on the durations for these activities. And you may say, well, the activities, they're already defined in the activity list. So why do I need the project scope statement? Well, the project scope statement will tell us the overall assumptions. For example, assumptions about reporting periods or existing conditions that affect duration estimates. Or we also have constraints about the project in our scope statement. One constraint could be that the maximum work time per day is 7 hours and not 8 hours, or that specific equipment is not available in April. That would need to be taken into consideration. It's similar with the risk register. Why do we need this here? Well, the risk register shows the result of your risk analysis and risk response planning, and you need to consider this in estimating activity durations. If things are riskier, well, they may take longer. Based on the risk response planning, decisions may have been made that affect duration. For example, if an activity is particularly critical or tricky, perhaps you want to allocate more time to that specific activity. Responding to the risk in this way, you may then need to update the risk register as part of your project document. Updates later on as an output from this process. According to the PMBOK guide, the RBS or resource breakdown structure is a hierarchical representation of resources by category and by type. And when we discussed the resource calendar, we discussed how the type of resources and specific attributes will influence the duration of schedule activities. The resource breakdown structure is the reference which can be used to look up the information on your resources, such as skill level or resource category, like is it a labor, material, equipment, or is it supplies? One of the reasons why we need enterprise environmental factors is because we want and need the reference data. Although projects are by nature unique, your company will probably have done similar projects in the past, and as such, historical data on estimations may be available internally in duration estimating databases and other reference data sources, or they may be available as productivity metrics, or you can also buy such databases externally, or this is available as published commercial information. These are very helpful in areas where the duration is clear-cut, like it takes 2 hours for paint to dry, or it takes 3 weeks for a license to be approved, or a building inspection takes 8 hours. Let's take a look at one other environmental factor to see how these are influencing your project in estimating activity durations, and that is the location of your team members. You would have to consider, well, do we have different time zones where our team members are part of? That may mean scheduling common meeting times which work across time zones. It may be that the project never sleeps. There's always somebody awake and you really have a 24/7 production here on your project. Perhaps we need to allocate some time for team members or other resources to move location to perform their assigned activities. So you see how relevant of an input enterprise environmental factors can be. And you are going to need the organizational process assets for a similar reasons. Our organization may have collected information that will help us in estimating. This could be historical information on durations, or there could be a scheduling methodology and project calendars and calendar of working days which are relevant and need to be considered. Or we may have the lessons learned files from previous projects at our disposal, from which we can learn about how they estimated and how well they estimated and how on target they were in the end. So it's always good to use your organizational process assets in this way. And this concludes part 1 of our review of the estimate activity durations process. So, Justine, what do we say?
Rosebud.
Until next time.